True kindness is never wasted, even when it costs you everything and seems to disappear into silence. The smallest act of compassion given freely to those the world overlooks can become the foundation upon which entire lives are rebuilt. Once upon a time, there was a woman named Helen Brown. Helen was not wealthy. She was not educated. She did not own a car or wear clothes without coffee stains. But everyone at Eddie's Diner on Sunset Boulevard knew one thing about her. Helen was kind even when kindness cost her everything. Every morning before dawn broke over Los Angeles, Helen woke up on a mattress that sagged in the middle. Her apartment was small and cold. The heater had broken 2 winters ago. The walls were thin enough to hear her neighbors fighting. Still, she always sat up, pressed her hands to her lower back, and whispered to herself, "One day at a time, Helen. One day at a time." She washed her face with cold water. She pulled on her faded yellow uniform, the one with the permanent stain near the 3rd button that wouldn't come out no matter how hard she scrubbed. Then she tied her hair back and walked 6 blocks to the bus stop in the dark. The bus ride took 40 minutes. Helen stood the whole way because the seats were always full. Her feet already hurt before her shift even began. At Eddie's Diner, she clocked in. She put on her apron. She filled the coffee pots. The smell of burnt bacon and old grease filled the air. Even though her tips were never enough and her manager watched her like a hawk, as she wiped down the counter, she talked to herself like someone was listening. "Today will be better," she said quietly. "God will help me today." When the morning rush started, Helen moved between tables with a smile. She poured coffee. She took orders. She carried heavy trays that made her shoulders scream. This was her life. No security, no savings, just a name tag, a notepad, and hope. Customers came and went. Some were polite. Many were not. Helen smiled at everyone anyway. "Good morning," she said again and again. Some people replied. Most didn't even look up from their phones. By late afternoon, when the lunch crowd thinned out, Helen stood at the register counting her tips. She frowned. It was not much. She sighed but kept working. That was when she noticed them again. Outside the diner window, near the edge of the parking lot, 3 small children sat on the curb. They were always there. Helen had seen them before many times. But that day, she really looked at them. They were thin. Their clothes were dirty and too big. Their shoes had holes. Dust covered their arms and faces. But what caught her eye was not the dirt. It was their faces. They looked the same. The same haunted eyes, the same sharp cheekbones, the same way they sat perfectly still, watching people eat through the glass. The next day, Helen brought extra bread from home. Not much, just 3 rolls left over from the discount bakery she'd passed on Sunday. She wrapped them in a clean napkin and tucked them into her apron pocket. During her break, she walked outside. The 3 children were sitting in the same spot by the curb, legs pulled up to their chests. The older boy, maybe 8 or 9, had his arms around the younger 2. They looked up when Helen approached, their eyes wide and wary like stray animals that had been kicked too many times. "You hungry?" Helen asked softly. The older boy didn't answer, but the little girl nodded once, barely a movement at all. Helen knelt down, ignoring the pain in her knees. She pulled out the rolls and handed one to each child. They stared at the bread like it might disappear. Then all 3 of them grabbed it and ate so fast Helen thought they might choke. "Slow down, babies," she said gently. "Slow down." The little girl looked up at her with crumbs on her chin. "Thank you," she whispered. Helen's chest tightened. "What are your names?" "Marvin," the oldest boy said quietly. He pointed to the younger boy. "That's Michael." Then to the girl. "Pamela." "I'm Helen." She smiled. "You come back tomorrow, okay? I'll bring you something else." Marvin nodded slowly, still watching her like he was trying to figure out if she was real. Helen went back inside and finished her shift. But all evening, she kept glancing out the window to make sure they were still there. The next morning, she made extra oatmeal. She packed it in a small container and brought it to work. At lunch, she gave them half her sandwich. The day after that, she snuck them leftover pancakes wrapped in foil. It went on like that for a week. Helen bringing food. The children waiting. A quiet routine that felt like the only good thing she was doing in the world. But Rita noticed. Rita was the head waitress, 52 years old with bleached blonde hair and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. She'd worked at Eddie's Diner for 17 years and acted like she owned the place. She watched everything. She judged everyone. On Thursday afternoon, Rita cornered Helen by the coffee station. "I see what you're doing," Rita said, her voice low and sharp. Helen kept pouring coffee into a pot. I don't know what you mean. Those kids outside. You're feeding them. Helen didn't answer. You gonna lose your job over some street kids? Rita leaned closer. You think Eddie don't notice when food goes missing? You think he don't count every damn roll and slice of bacon? Helen set the coffee pot down carefully. They're hungry, Rita. So are a lot of people. Don't make them your problem. They're children. Rita snorted. They got parents somewhere. We're social services. Not your responsibility, Helen. Helen turned to face her. Maybe not. But I can't just watch them starve. Yes, you can, Rita said flatly. That's what the rest of us do. We got our own bills. Our own problems. She crossed her arms. You keep this up, Eddie's gonna fire you. Then what? You gonna feed them when you ain't got a job yourself? Helen swallowed hard. She knew Rita was right. She knew it was risky. But every time she looked at those children, she saw something in their eyes that wouldn't let her turn away. I'll be careful, Helen said quietly. Rita shook her head. You're a fool. Helen went back to work. But Rita's words stayed with her all day, heavy and cold in her chest. The next afternoon, Eddie called her into his office. He was a short man with a round belly and grease stains on his shirt. He sat behind a messy desk covered in receipts and invoices. Sit down, Helen, he said. She sat. Eddie leaned back in his chair and folded his hands over his stomach. I'm going to be straight with you. I've been getting complaints. Helen's heart dropped. Complaints. About food going missing. About you giving away meals without paying. He stared at her. Is it true? Helen hesitated. She thought about lying, but she'd never been good at it. There are 3 children outside, she said slowly. They're homeless. They're hungry. I've been giving them small things. Just leftovers and... Stop. Eddie held up his hand. I don't care if they're hungry. I don't care if they're orphans. This is a business, Helen. I can't have employees stealing food. I wasn't stealing. I was. Giving away food you didn't pay for is stealing. His voice was firm. I'm warning you now. It stops today. You give away one more thing, one roll, one glass of water, I'm letting you go. Understand? Helen's throat felt tight. Yes. Good. Eddie waved his hand toward the door. Get back to work. Helen stood up and walked out of the office. Her hands were shaking. She finished her shift in silence. She didn't look out the window. She didn't think about the children. She just moved through the hours like a machine, taking orders and pouring coffee and trying not to cry. When her shift ended, she clocked out and went to the back to get her things. She had exactly 1 to-go container sitting in her locker, her own dinner. A small portion of meatloaf and mashed potatoes she'd paid for with her employee discount. She picked it up and stared at it. Her stomach was already growling. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and that had only been a piece of toast. Helen walked toward the front door. Through the window, she could see the sky turning dark. Storm clouds rolled in thick and heavy. The first drops of rain started to fall. And there, across the street at the bus stop, huddled together under the narrow shelter, were Marvin, Michael, and Pamela. They were soaked. Their thin clothes clung to their bodies. Pamela was shivering. Michael had his arms wrapped around her. Marvin stared out at the rain with an empty expression, like he'd already given up on the world being kind. Helen stopped walking. She looked down at the container in her hands, then back at the children. Rita's voice echoed in her head. You gonna lose your job over some street kids? Eddie's voice followed. It stops today. Helen closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she walked outside into the rain. The cold water hit her face and soaked through her uniform in seconds. She crossed the street and walked up to the bus stop. The 3 children looked up at her, surprised. Miss Helen, Marvin said. Helen knelt down in front of them. Water dripped from her hair onto the pavement. She held out the container. Here, she said softly. You take this. Marvin stared at the food. But isn't that yours? I already ate, Helen lied. I'm full. Pamela's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Helen reached out and gently touched the little girl's cheek. You're welcome, baby. She stood up and looked at Marvin. You make sure they share it, okay? And you eat slow. Marvin nodded. We will. Helen started to walk away, but Marvin called after her. Miss Helen. She turned back. Why do you keep helping us? He asked. His voice was small and confused. Nobody else does. Helen's chest ached. She thought about all the answers she could give. About God. About kindness. About doing what's right. But none of those words felt big enough. So she just smiled through the rain and said, because you matter. Don't ever forget that. Then she turned and walked to her own bus stop 2 blocks down. She stood there shivering, soaking wet, with an empty stomach and an aching heart. But when the bus finally came and she climbed on, when she sat down in the back and closed her eyes, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The next morning, Helen woke up with a headache and an empty stomach. She got dressed. She tied her hair back. She rode the bus to work. When she arrived at Eddie's diner, she looked across the street toward the curb where the children always sat. They weren't there. Helen frowned. Maybe they were late. Maybe they'd found somewhere else to go. She clocked in and started her shift. But all day, she kept glancing out the window. The children never came. The second day, Helen told herself they'd come back. Children wander. They find new places. Maybe someone else was helping them now. Maybe that was a good thing. She worked her shift and looked out the window every 15 minutes. The curb stayed empty. The unfinished building across the street sat silent and still. By the third day, the worry had settled into her stomach like a stone. Helen couldn't concentrate. She mixed up orders. She poured coffee into a glass that already had orange juice in it. She forgot to bring a customer their check, and they had to ask twice. Rita noticed. Of course Rita noticed. "You still thinking about those kids?" Rita asked during the afternoon lull. She was wiping down the counter with sharp, aggressive strokes. Helen nodded. "They're just gone. That's what street kids do. They move around. Probably found a better corner somewhere." Rita didn't look up from the counter. Or maybe they went back to wherever they came from. "They didn't have anywhere to come from," Helen said quietly. "That's why they were here." Rita shrugged. "Either way, it ain't your problem anymore." But it felt like her problem. It felt like a hole had opened up in Helen's chest, and she couldn't figure out how to close it. On the fourth day, Helen started asking around. During her break, she walked to the bodega 2 doors down. Mr. Kim, the owner, was restocking cigarettes behind the counter. "Excuse me," Helen said. "Did you see those 3 children who used to sit across the street?" Mr. Kim looked up. "The white kids. The ones always together." "Yes. Have you seen them?" He shook his head. "Not for a few days now." "Why?" "I'm just wondering where they went." Mr. Kim studied her face. "You're the one who was feeding them." Helen blinked. "You knew." Everyone knew. He turned back to the cigarettes. "You got a good heart. But kids like that, they don't stay in one place long." Helen thanked him and left. But his words didn't make her feel better. She asked the bus driver on her route home that evening. A large man named Marcus who always greeted her with a tired smile. "Marcus, did you ever see 3 children, 2 boys and a girl around the diner where I work?" Marcus thought for a moment. "Skinny kids. Real quiet." "Yes. I seen 'em." He pulled the bus away from the curb and merged into traffic. "But not lately." "Why you asking?" "They're gone. I'm trying to find out where." Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You close with them or something?" Helen hesitated. "How do you explain being close to children you barely knew? Children you only fed and smiled at and worried about?" "I just want to make sure they're okay," she said finally. Marcus nodded slowly. "I hear you. But Helen, kids that young on the street alone. Either family came and got 'em, or CPS did. Either way, they ain't coming back to that corner." Helen's chest tightened. "CPS. Child Protective Services. They do sweeps sometimes. Pick up homeless kids and put 'em in the system." He stopped at a red light and turned to look at her. "That might be a good thing, you know. Better than living on the street." Helen wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe they were somewhere warm and safe with full stomachs and clean clothes. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she should have done more. That she should have asked their story. That she should have found a way to help beyond a few stolen meals. A week passed. Then 2. The empty curb became normal. Helen stopped looking out the window so often. She stopped expecting to see them. But she didn't stop thinking about them. One evening, near closing time, Helen was taking out the trash to the dumpster in the back alley. The sun had set, and the air was cool. She was exhausted, her feet hurt, her back ached, and she still had a 30-minute bus ride home. She lifted the garbage bag into the dumpster and was about to go back inside when she noticed a man sitting against the wall near the dumpster. He was older, maybe 60, with a long gray beard and layers of clothes that smelled like sweat and old rain. Helen had seen him before. He was one of the regular homeless men who drifted through the area. She'd given him food once or twice when Eddie wasn't looking. "Evening," Helen said quietly. The man looked up. His eyes were cloudy but kind. "Evening, sister." Helen started to walk away, then stopped. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "There were 3 children who used to sit across the street. 2 boys and a girl. White kids, real thin. You ever see them? The man nodded slowly. The Moore kids. Yeah, I seen 'em. Helen's heart jumped. Moore. That's their last name. That's what the older boy said. Marvin Moore. The man scratched his beard. They was living in that unfinished building for a while. Their mama was around sometime, but she was not well and later passed. You know what I mean. Helen's stomach twisted. What happened to them? The man looked down at his hands. CPS came. About 2 weeks ago. Had a van and everything. Social worker lady came and talked to the kids, then took him away. He paused. Marvin didn't want to go. He was crying, saying they needed to see Helen. But they took him anyway. Helen felt like she couldn't breathe. Do you know where? Into the system, I guess. Foster care, group homes, wherever they put kids like that. He looked up at her. You knew them. I fed them, Helen whispered. For a few weeks. I gave them food. The man smiled, but it was sad. They talked about you. The lady with the kind face, Marvin called you. Said you were the only one who treated them like people. Helen's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her hand against her mouth. You okay, sister? The man asked. Helen shook her head. She wasn't okay. She felt like something inside her was breaking apart. Did they say anything else? She managed to ask. The man thought for a moment. Marvin said he wanted to thank you. He said when he grew up, he was going to find you and pay you back. The man's smile grew a little wider. That boy had hope, even when he had nothing else. That's something. Helen couldn't hold it together anymore. The tears came fast and hot, spilling down her cheeks. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. The man stood up slowly and took a step toward her, then stopped, like he wasn't sure if it was appropriate. Hey now. It's okay. It's not okay, Helen choked out. I should have done more. I should have helped them more. I should have. You did what you could, the man said gently. That's all anybody can do. But it wasn't enough. Maybe not. But it was something. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The little girl dropped this the day they took him. I picked it up, thought maybe I'd see him again and give it back. But I ain't seen him since. He held it out to Helen. She took it with shaking hands and unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing on the back of an old receipt. 3 stick figures standing next to a bigger stick figure. The bigger one had a yellow dress Helen's uniform. Above it, in shaky child handwriting, were the words, "Thank you, Miss Helen. Love, Pamela." Helen stared at the drawing. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. She just stood there holding that small piece of paper like it was made of glass. Keep it, the man said softly. She wants you to have it. Helen nodded, unable to form words. The man shuffled past her toward the street. You're a good woman, sister. Don't forget that. Then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the alley. Helen stood alone in the dark, clutching the drawing. The sobs came harder now, from somewhere deep in her chest. She leaned against the brick wall and let herself cry for Marvin and Michael and Pamela, for all the children who slipped through the cracks, for all the kindness in the world that never felt like enough. She cried for herself too, for the loneliness, for the exhaustion, for the question that wouldn't leave her alone. What was the point of caring when everything you cared about just disappeared? After a long time, Helen wiped her face. She folded the drawing carefully and put it in her apron pocket, right next to her heart. Then she went back inside, clocked out, and rode the bus home in silence. That night, she put the drawing on her refrigerator, held in place by a magnet shaped like a sunflower. She stared at it for a long time before going to bed. She wondered if they were safe, if they were together, if they remembered her. She wondered if kindness was just another word for heartbreak. And she wondered if, somewhere out there in the dark, those 3 children were looking up at the same sky and thinking about the woman in the yellow uniform who told them they mattered. 6 years passed like water through a broken faucet, slow, steady, and impossible to hold on to. Helen turned 51 on a Tuesday in March. She woke up the same way she always did, with pain in her lower back and stiffness in her knees. The alarm clock on her nightstand blinked 5:47 a.m. She sat up slowly, pressing her palms against the mattress for support. Her apartment looked the same as it had 6 years ago. The same thin curtains. The same water stain on the ceiling that spread a little wider each winter. The same refrigerator that hummed too loud and froze everything in the back. But Helen had changed. Her hair had more gray now than black. Deep lines creased the corners of her eyes and mouth. Her hands, those hands that had carried thousands of plates and poured thousands of cups of coffee, were swollen at the joints. Arthritis, The free clinic doctor had said. Nothing we can do but manage the pain. She stood up and walked to the bathroom. Her reflection in the mirror looked tired. She looked like a woman who'd been fighting a war for decades and was finally losing. Helen washed her face with cold water. She got dressed in her uniform, the same yellow dress she'd worn for years, now so faded it was almost white in places. The coffee stain near the third button had company now. New stains. New wear. She'd tried to buy a new uniform once, but the cost was more than her electric bill. She tied her hair back and left the apartment. The bus ride was the same. Stand for 40 minutes because the seats were always full. Watch the city wake up through dirty windows. But when Helen arrived at Eddie's diner, things were different. Eddie had sold the place 2 years ago to a restaurant group from Las Vegas. They'd kept the name but changed everything else. New menus. New prices. New rules. The booths had been reupholstered in bright red vinyl that squeaked when people sat down. The walls were painted with murals of palm trees and beaches that looked nothing like Los Angeles. The new manager was a thin man named Derek who wore too much cologne and smiled with his mouth, but not his eyes. He'd cut Helen's hours from 40 a week to 25. Said it was about efficiency and labor costs. Rita had been let go completely. They'd hired younger servers, girls in their 20s with perfect skin and bright smiles who could move faster and complain less. Helen clocked in and started her shift. The morning rush was smaller now. The diner was struggling. People had new places to go, trendier places with avocado toast and oat milk lattes. Eddie's diner was old and tired, just like Helen. She moved through her tables slowly. Her feet hurt before she'd even served her first customer. By noon, her knees were screaming. By 2, she had to sit down in the back for 5 minutes just to catch her breath. Derek noticed. He always noticed. "Helen, you okay?" he asked, but his voice had that edge to it. That tone that really meant you're slowing down. "I'm fine," Helen said. "Just need a minute." Derek nodded, but she could see the calculation in his eyes. How much longer until she became a liability? How much longer until he had an excuse to let her go? Helen finished her shift and collected her tips. $18. Barely enough to buy groceries for 3 days. She rode the bus home and climbed the stairs to her apartment. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside, she checked her mailbox. Bills. Always bills. Electric. Water. A notice from her doctor's office about an overdue balance. And one more, a letter from the pharmacy. Helen opened it and felt her stomach drop. Her diabetes medication had gone up in price. The insurance she barely had didn't cover the new cost. She'd need to pay $240 a month now instead of $90. She couldn't afford that. Helen sat down at her small kitchen table and put her head in her hands. The numbers didn't work. They hadn't worked in years, but she'd been juggling them, moving money around, skipping meals, letting bills go late. Now there was nothing left to juggle. She looked at the calendar on her wall. Tuesday, March 12th. Her birthday. Nobody knew. Nobody had called. Nobody would. Helen stood up and opened her cabinet. She had 3 packets of ramen noodles, half a jar of peanut butter, and a can of beans. She took out one of the ramen packets and boiled water on the stove. While she waited, she looked at her refrigerator. The drawing was still there. Pamela's stick figures. 6 years old now, the paper yellowed and curling at the edges. Helen stared at it while the water bubbled behind her. She wondered where they were. Marvin would be 15 now. Michael, 14. Pamela, 13. Almost not children anymore. Did they remember her? Did they ever think about the woman in the yellow uniform who gave them food and told them they mattered? Or had she been just another face in a long line of temporary kindness? A small moment in their lives that meant nothing once they moved on. Helen poured the boiling water over the noodles and waited 3 minutes. She didn't add anything else. No egg. No vegetables. Just the noodles and the flavoring packet. She sat down at the table and ate slowly. The noodles were bland and too salty at the same time. But they were warm, and they filled her stomach. Halfway through the bowl, Helen started crying. Not loud sobs like in the alley 6 years ago. Just quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks and dripped into her ramen. She didn't wipe them away. She just let them fall. She was so tired. Tired of hurting. Tired of struggling. Tired of working so hard and having nothing to show for it. Tired of being invisible to a world that didn't care if she existed or not. She thought about those children. About the choice she'd made to feed them when she could barely feed herself. About the drawing on her refrigerator that was supposed to mean something, but just reminded her of all the ways kindness hadn't been enough. Maybe Rita had been right. Maybe she should have looked after herself. Maybe she should have kept her head down, saved her pennies, protected what little she had. Maybe caring was just a luxury for people who could afford it. Helen finished her ramen and washed the bowl in the sink. Her hands were shaking. The arthritis made it hard to grip things now. She had to hold the bowl with both hands so it wouldn't slip. She dried it and put it away. Then she walked to her bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made you aware of how alone you were. Helen lay down and pulled the thin blanket over herself. She stared at the water stain on the ceiling and thought about her life. 51 years old. No husband. No children. No savings. No security. Just a faded uniform, a broken body, and a bus pass that would expire at the end of the month. What had it all been for? She thought about her mother, who died when Helen was 19. Her mother used to say, "Baby, you got a good heart. Don't let this world take that from you." But what was a good heart worth when it left you alone and exhausted on your birthday, eating ramen and crying into the dark? Helen closed her eyes. She didn't pray. She'd stopped praying years ago. Not because she stopped believing in God, but because she'd run out of things to ask for. She just lay there, feeling the weight of invisible living pressed down on her chest like a hand she couldn't push away. Tomorrow she'd wake up. Tomorrow she'd put on the uniform. Tomorrow she'd ride the bus and smile at customers and count her small tips and try not to think about how little it all mattered. But tonight, on her 51st birthday, Helen let herself feel the truth she usually kept buried. She was drowning. Slowly, quietly, and nobody was coming to save her. Outside her window, the city hummed with life. Cars passed. People laughed. Music played from a neighbor's apartment. The world kept turning, indifferent and vast. And Helen Brown, the woman who'd given food to hungry children when she had none to spare, lay in the dark and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake by caring at all. The drawing stayed on the refrigerator, a small testament to a kindness the world had already forgotten. Or so she thought. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in late October. The lunch rush was in full swing. Helen moved between tables with her usual careful slowness, balancing a tray of burgers and fries. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. Everything hurt. But she smiled anyway because that's what you did when you needed tips. She was refilling coffee for an older couple in booth 7 when she heard the sound. 3 engines. Powerful and smooth. The kind of sound that made people look up. Helen glanced toward the window just as 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb directly in front of the diner. The vehicles were identical, sleek, expensive, with tinted windows that reflected the afternoon sun like mirrors. The entire street seemed to pause. A delivery truck slowed down. Pedestrians stopped walking. Inside the diner, conversations quieted as customers turned to look. "What the hell?" someone muttered. Derek came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "We expecting somebody?" Nobody answered. Everyone just stared. The first SUV's door opened. A young man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair styled neatly and a sharp jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly, tailored and expensive. His shoes gleamed in the sunlight. The second door opened. Another young man emerged. Slightly shorter, broader in the shoulders, with the same dark hair but gentler features. His suit was navy blue, equally expensive, and he wore glasses with thin silver frames. The third door opened last. A young woman stepped out. She was striking not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because of the way she carried herself. Confident, poised. She wore a cream-colored blazer over a black dress, and her hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders. Diamond earrings caught the light. All 3 of them were white. All 3 of them looked like they'd just stepped out of a magazine about success and money and lives that people like Helen only saw on television. "Holy shit," one of the cooks said from the kitchen window. "Who are they?" "Probably celebrities," a customer said. "Or drug dealers," another added. Helen stood frozen by booth 7, the coffee pot still in her hand. The 3 strangers stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the diner. Then they started scanning the interior through the windows. Searching, looking for something. Or someone. The tall man in the charcoal suit spotted her first. His eyes locked onto Helen. His mouth opened slightly. Then his face crumpled, and tears spilled down his cheeks. The second man saw her next. He pressed his hand against his mouth, and his shoulders shook. The woman in the cream blazer covered her face with both hands and sobbed. Helen's heart started pounding. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't recognize them. But something in her chest was pulling, like a string being tugged from the inside. The three strangers walked toward the diner entrance. The entire restaurant watched in stunned silence as they pushed through the door. The little bell chimed. They stepped inside, and suddenly the diner felt too small, like their presence took up all the air. They walked straight toward Helen. She set the coffee pot down on the nearest table with shaking hands. Her mind was racing, trying to understand, trying to place their faces. The tall man in the charcoal suit stopped 3 feet away from her. He was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. His voice came out rough and broken. "Miss Helen." The sound of her name in his mouth sent a shock through her body. "You told us we mattered," he said, his voice cracking. "You made us believe it." Helen's breath caught in her throat. The second man stepped forward. He pulled off his glasses to wipe his eyes. "You told us not to forget." The woman reached out like she wanted to touch Helen, but wasn't sure if she was allowed. "You gave us food when we had nothing." And then Helen saw it. The shape of their faces. The same eyes. The same way they stood close together, like they were still huddling under a bus stop in the rain. "Marvin," Helen whispered. The tall man nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, ma'am." Helen's knees almost gave out. "Michael." "Pamela." "It's us," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. Helen couldn't speak, couldn't think. She just stood there staring at them, these children who'd been thin and dirty and hollow-eyed, now grown into beautiful, successful adults who looked like they owned the world. "How?" Helen started, but the word died in her throat. Marvin reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a wallet, black leather, expensive, and opened it carefully. From one of the compartments, he took out a small laminated card. He held it out to Helen with both hands, like it was made of gold. Helen took it with trembling fingers. It was a piece of paper, yellowed and creased before it had been preserved in plastic. The writing was faded but still visible. Her own handwriting. "You matter. Don't forget." Helen's vision blurred. She remembered writing this. She remembered slipping it into the container of food on that last rainy night. She'd written it on a napkin while the children weren't looking, wanting them to have something more than a meal, something to hold on to. "I carry this every day," Marvin said, his voice breaking. "Every single day for the last years. When I wanted to give up, I looked at it. When I felt like I was nothing, I read it. When the world told me I didn't belong anywhere, I remembered that you thought I mattered." Helen couldn't hold back anymore. The tears came fast and hard, spilling down her cheeks. "I thought I'd never see you again," she choked out. "I thought. We've been looking for you," Pamela said, stepping closer. "For 2 years. We didn't know your last name. We only knew your first name and that you worked at a diner on Sunset Boulevard. We went to every diner, every restaurant, every coffee shop. Until yesterday," Michael added. "When someone finally told us about Eddie's diner and a waitress named Helen who'd been here for years." Helen looked at them, really looked at them. They weren't just successful. They were here. They'd come back. They'd searched for her. They'd remembered. "You're really here," she whispered. "We're really here," Marvin said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he took her hand in both of his. "And we came to say thank you." The diner was completely silent. Every customer, every server, Derek standing by the kitchen, everyone was watching with tears in their eyes. "But I didn't do anything," Helen said, her voice small. "I just gave you food." "You gave us more than food," Pamela said. "You gave us dignity. You looked at us like we were human beings, not trash on the street. You smiled at us. You talked to us. You told us we mattered when everyone else pretended we didn't exist. You saved us," Michael said quietly. Marvin squeezed Helen's hand. "Miss Helen, do you know what happened after CPS took us?" Helen shook her head, unable to speak. "We got placed in foster care. Together, thank God. With a family who actually cared." His voice was steady now, stronger. "And every night for the first year, when things got hard, when I was angry and scared and didn't know if I could keep going, I'd take out this note. And I'd read it. And I'd remember the woman who fed us when she didn't have to, who gave us her own dinner in the rain. And I'd tell my brothers and sister," he continued, "that if someone like you existed in the world, someone who had nothing but still gave everything, then maybe there was hope for us too." Maybe we could be people who mattered. Helen was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. I didn't know if you were safe. I didn't know if. We're safe, Pamela said gently. We're more than safe. And we're here because we owe you everything. You don't owe me anything, Helen said. Marvin smiled through his tears. Yes, we do. And we're going to spend the rest of our lives proving it. Marvin gestured toward the door. Miss Helen, would you come outside with us for a moment? Helen looked around the diner. Every eye was on her. Derek nodded, his face softer than she'd ever seen it. Go ahead, Helen. Take your time. Helen's legs felt weak, but Pamela took her arm gently, steadying her. Together, the four of them walked outside into the afternoon sun. The street had gathered now. People stood on the sidewalk watching. Shopkeepers came out of their stores. Even the homeless man who usually sat 3 blocks down had wandered closer, curious about the commotion. Marvin turned to face Helen. Behind him, Michael and Pamela stood on either side, their faces still wet with tears but smiling now. Smiling like they'd been waiting for this moment their entire lives. Miss Helen, Marvin began, his voice carrying across the street. 6 years ago, you saw 3 children who everyone else ignored. We were dirty. We were homeless. We were nobody. But you treated us like we were somebody. People on the sidewalk had gone quiet, listening. After CPS took us, we were placed with a foster family in Riverside. Tom and Sarah Chun. Good people who didn't just give us a home, they gave us a chance. Marvin's voice was steady now, stronger. We stayed together. All 3 of us. That almost never happens, but they fought to keep us together because they knew we needed each other. Michael stepped forward. They helped us catch up in school, got us tutoring, made sure we did our homework, believed in us even when we didn't believe in ourselves. And every night, Pamela added, Marvin would show us that note, the one you wrote, and he'd say, see, someone cared. Someone thought we mattered. So we better prove her right. Helen's hand flew to her mouth. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I graduated high school with honors, Marvin continued. Got a scholarship to UC Berkeley. Studied computer science. After college, I started a tech company with 2 friends. We built software for small businesses. Last year, we sold it for $42 million. The crowd gasped. Helen felt like the ground was tilting under her feet. Michael adjusted his glasses. I became a doctor. Pediatrics. I work at Children's Hospital Los Angeles now. I specialize in treating kids from low-income families, kids like we were. Kids who need someone to see them. Pamela smiled. And I'm an attorney. Family law. I help families navigate the foster care system. I help kids who fall through the cracks find stability and safety. Helen couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was hearing. These children, her children, in the only way that mattered, had become extraordinary. We spent the last 2 years looking for you, Marvin said. We hired investigators. We went to every diner, every restaurant, every place we could think of. We only knew your first name and that you worked somewhere on Sunset Boulevard. But we weren't going to stop until we found you. Because we needed you to know, Michael said, his voice cracking again, that what you did mattered. That you mattered. Marvin reached into his other pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He held it out to Helen with both hands. Miss Helen, we know you're still working here. We know you're struggling. We know life hasn't been easy. His eyes were fierce now, determined. And we're not going to let you struggle anymore. Helen took the envelope with shaking hands. She didn't open it. She couldn't. Inside that envelope, Pamela said gently, are 3 things. First, the deed to a restaurant 3 blocks from here. It used to be an old Italian place that closed down last year. We bought it. We renovated it. And as of yesterday, it's fully owned by you. It's called Helen's Place. Helen's knees buckled. Michael caught her arm, holding her steady. Second, Pamela continued, is paperwork for a trust fund we've set up in your name. $1 million. For your medical care, your retirement, whatever you need. You'll never have to worry about money again. Helen couldn't speak. Couldn't think. The world had gone fuzzy around the edges. And third, Marvin said, his voice soft now, intimate, are 3 letters. One from each of us. Explaining what you did for us. What you meant to us. What you still mean to us. He stepped closer. Miss Helen, you gave us everything when you had nothing. You fed us when you were hungry. You showed us kindness when the world showed us cruelty. You told us we mattered when everyone else told us we didn't. Now it's our turn, Michael said. It's our turn to take care of you. Helen finally opened her mouth, but all that came out was a sob. A deep, broken sound that came from somewhere she'd kept locked away for years. Pamela stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Helen. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's okay to cry. We've got you now." And then Michael was there, his arms around them both. And Marvin, towering over all of them, his arms encompassing his family because that's what they were, Helen realized. They were family, not by blood, but by something deeper, by choice, by love, by the kind of bond that forms when someone sees you at your worst and treats you with dignity anyway. They stood there on the sidewalk, the four of them wrapped together, crying in front of a crowd of strangers who weren't strangers anymore. People were wiping their eyes. Someone started clapping. Then another person joined. Then another. The entire street erupted in applause. Inside the diner, Derek was crying. The customers were crying. Even the line cook who never smiled was wiping his eyes with his apron. When they finally pulled apart, Marvin kept his hand on Helen's shoulder. "There's one more thing," he said. "Will you come see it? Will you come see Helen's place?" Helen nodded, unable to form words. They walked together, the four of them, 3 blocks down Sunset Boulevard. The black SUVs followed slowly behind. The crowd followed too, a strange procession of witnesses to something miraculous. They stopped in front of what used to be Marino's Italian restaurant. But it didn't look like that anymore. The exterior had been repainted a warm cream color. New windows gleamed in the afternoon light. Above the door, in elegant gold letters, was a sign, "Helen's Place." And underneath, in smaller script, "Where everyone matters." Marvin pulled out a set of keys and placed them in Helen's palm. "It's yours," he said simply. Helen's hand closed around the keys. They were warm from being in his pocket. She looked up at the sign, at the beautiful building, at the 3 grown children standing beside her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why? Why would you do all this?" Pamela took her hand. "Because you taught us that kindness isn't weakness, that caring for others isn't foolish, that one person with a good heart can change everything. You changed us," Michael said. "And now we get to change you." Marvin opened the door. "Come inside." The interior took Helen's breath away. The space was beautiful warm wood floors, comfortable booths upholstered in soft green fabric, paintings of Los Angeles on the walls. There was a counter with stools, a kitchen visible through a window where gleaming equipment waited. Everything was new. Everything was perfect. And in the center of the dining room was a single table, already set with 4 place settings. "We thought you might be hungry," Marvin said with a small smile. They sat together at that table, Helen and Marvin and Michael and Pamela. Someone from the SUVs brought in food, real food, not diner food. Roasted chicken and fresh vegetables and bread that was still warm. They ate together. They talked. They cried and laughed and filled in the gaps of 6 years. Marvin told her about the foster family, about learning to code, about building his company from nothing. Michael told her about medical school, about the night he delivered his first baby and thought of her. Pamela told her about law school, about the first case she won, about keeping that laminated note on her desk through every exam and every late night. And Helen told them about the drawing on her refrigerator, about how she'd looked at it every day for years, about how she'd wondered if they were safe, if they remembered, if her kindness had meant anything at all. "It meant everything," Marvin said firmly. "It was the foundation we built our lives on." When the meal was finished, they sat in comfortable silence. Helen looked at her hands resting on the table. These hands that had carried so many plates, poured so many cups of coffee, given away so many meals she couldn't afford. These hands that had hurt for so long. Pamela reached over and covered Helen's hands with her own. Her touch was gentle, reverent. "You fed us when we had nothing," Marvin said, his voice thick with emotion. "Now we get to feed you." Helen looked around the restaurant, her restaurant. Helen's Place, where everyone matters. She looked at these 3 beautiful souls who'd found their way back to her, who'd searched for her, who'd remembered. And for the first time, Helen M. Brown felt like she was home. Not a building, not a place, but a feeling. The feeling of being seen, being valued, being loved. Her hands, those worn, swollen, aching hands, finally rested. Finally still. Finally home. Outside, the sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Inside Helen's Place, 4 people sat together at a table, bound by something stronger than blood, bound by kindness, by dignity, by the simple truth that we are all capable of saving each other if we just pay attention, if we just care. Helen smiled through her tears and squeezed Pamela's hand. Thank you, she whispered. No, Marvin said softly. Thank you. 5 years later, Helen's place had become more than a restaurant. It had become a refuge. Every morning at 6, Helen arrived through the back door. She was 56 now, moving slower than before, but the pain in her joints had eased since she could finally afford her medication. Her hair was fully gray, which she wore proudly now, tied back in a neat bun. She wore a new uniform, not yellow, but a deep forest green with her name embroidered over the heart in gold thread. But she wasn't alone anymore. Marvin had moved back to Los Angeles 2 years ago, relocating his company headquarters to be closer. He stopped by every Tuesday morning for coffee, sitting at the counter while Helen poured, talking about business and life and everything in between. He'd gotten married last spring, a quiet ceremony in the restaurant with Helen in the front row, crying happy tears. Michael came by after his hospital shifts, usually exhausted, often bringing other doctors and nurses who'd heard about the place where a pediatrician's foster mother served the best meatloaf in the city. He always ordered the same thing, and Helen always remembered. Pamela visited every Sunday for brunch, bringing her case files and working at the corner table while Helen brought her endless coffee and fresh fruit. Sometimes she brought kids she was helping through the foster system, and Helen would slip them extra pancakes and a quiet word of encouragement. But Helen's place had become something else too. On the wall near the entrance, there was a board. Pay it forward, the sign above it read. Customers could buy meal vouchers for people who couldn't afford to eat. The vouchers hung on hooks, anonymous acts of kindness waiting to be claimed. The board was never empty, and Helen made sure that anyone who came in hungry left full, whether they had a voucher or not. She'd hired people others wouldn't. A formerly incarcerated man who couldn't find work became her best line cook. A woman escaping domestic violence became her assistant manager. Teenagers aging out of foster care found their first jobs bussing tables and washing dishes, learning skills and saving money while Helen taught them the same lesson Marvin had taught her. You matter, don't forget. On quiet mornings, before the restaurant opened, Helen would stand in the dining room and look around. At the tables that were always full, at the staff that had become family, at the 3 framed letters hanging behind the counter, one from Marvin, one from Michael, one from Pamela, explaining to anyone who read them what kindness could build. And sometimes she'd think about that rainy nights years ago when she'd given 3 children her only meal, when she'd made a choice that felt small at the time but turned out to be the most important decision of her life. She'd think about the woman she used to be, invisible, exhausted, wondering if caring was just another word for heartbreak. And she'd smile, because now she knew the answer. Caring was the only thing that had ever mattered. One Sunday morning, a young mother came in with 2 small children. They looked tired, hungry, nervous. The woman's hands shook as she reached for one of the meal vouchers on the board. Helen watched from behind the counter. Then she walked over, gently took the voucher from the woman's hand, and smiled. Keep that for another time, Helen said softly. Today, breakfast is on me. The woman's eyes filled with tears. I can't. Yes, you can, Helen said. And you will. Because you matter. Don't forget that. She seated them at the best table by the window where the morning light came in warm and golden. She brought them pancakes and eggs and orange juice. She brought them seconds when they finished. And when they left, she handed the mother a small card with the restaurant's information. If you ever need a meal, Helen said, you come here. Anytime. The woman hugged her, whispering thank you over and over. After they left, Helen stood at the window and watched them walk down Sunset Boulevard, the mother holding her children's hands, all 3 of them looking a little less burdened than when they'd arrived. Behind her, the door chimed. She turned to see Marvin walking in, carrying flowers like he did every Sunday. Morning, Miss Helen, he said, using the name he'd never stopped calling her. Morning, baby, Helen replied. He kissed her cheek and placed the sunflowers, always sunflowers, in the vase on the counter. Then he sat down at his usual stool and smiled at her. You fed someone again, he said. It wasn't a question. Helen poured him coffee. A young mother with 2 babies. They looked like they needed it. Marvin nodded, his eyes soft. You never stop, do you? Helen set the coffee pot down and looked at him, this boy who'd become a man, who'd built an empire on the foundation of knowing someone cared. Neither do you, she said quietly. He reached across the counter and took her hand. I learned from the best. Outside, Los Angeles woke up slowly. Cars passed. People rushed by. The city hummed with the chaos of lives intersecting and separating, of stories beginning and ending, of kindness given and received. And inside Helen's place, a woman who'd once been invisible stood in her own restaurant, surrounded by love, holding the hand of a child she'd saved who'd grown up to save her back. Her worn hands, those hands that had carried so much, given so much, hurt so much, rested gently in his. Finally still, finally home, finally knowing, without any doubt, that every act of kindness matters. Every single one, even the small ones, especially the small ones. Because you never know whose life you're changing when you choose to care. You never know who's watching. You never know who'll remember. And you never know who'll come back someday in 3 black SUVs to say, "You mattered to me. You changed everything. And I never forgot." Helen squeezed Marvin's hand and smiled. "Let's open up," she said. "People are waiting." And so they did. Small kindnesses are never small. They're seeds. And you never know what forest might grow from them. To all my amazing viewers, thank you. Every time you watch, like, and share my videos, you keep the echoes of love alive. Your support, your comments, and your time mean more than you know. This channel exists because of you. I appreciate you deeply.